The chrome on the handlebars was cool against his knuckles, a familiar anchor in the dizzying heat rising from the asphalt. Bear's world was one of simple textures: worn leather, hot metal, the gritty vibration of a V-twin engine running just beneath him. He sat on his bike outside a small roadside diner, the 177 patch stitched over his heart, a declaration of allegiance. The 177 Angels weren't a gang. They were a club, mostly ex-military, mechanics, and men who found solace in the controlled thunder of their machines. They kept to themselves, policed their own, and asked for nothing. A screen door whined open. Two little girls stepped out into the blinding afternoon sun, their grandmother fumbling with a wallet behind them. The older one, maybe 7, had braids so tight they pulled at her temples. The younger one, a tiny thing with enormous, vacant eyes, clung to her sister's hand. Her left arm was in a pristine white cast, a jarring splash of purity against her faded dress. Bear nodded once, a silent greeting he offered to all locals. The grandmother smiled weakly. The older girl, however, stopped, her eyes, wide and serious, fixed on the skull and wings insignia on his vest. She took a hesitant step forward, her grip on her sister's hand tightening. The little one, Mia, flinched, her small body tensing like a wire. Bear remained perfectly still. He'd learned in deserts and war zones that stillness was a language all its own. It could be a threat, or it could be an invitation. Right now he was trying to be a rock, something solid for the girl's terrified gaze to land on. The girl, Lily, took another step. She was now close enough that he could see the faint dusting of freckles across her nose and the chapped skin of her lower lip, which she worried between her teeth. She leaned in, her movements furtive and quick, as if she were stealing something. Her voice, when it came, was a puff of air, a secret meant only for the cracked leather of his vest. "Teacher hurts my sister if I tell." The words were so quiet he almost missed them. They didn't hit him like a punch. They slid into him like a splinter of ice, lodging somewhere deep and cold. He didn't move. He didn't blink. His entire world narrowed to the small, trembling girl and the devastating weight of her confession. He could feel the pulse in his own throat, a heavy, angry drumbeat. Lily's eyes darted back toward her grandmother, who was now paying at the counter. She pulled back, her face a mask of panicked regret. She had said it, the forbidden thing. She grabbed her sister's hand and scurried to the old sedan parked at the curb, not looking back. Bear watched them go. He watched the small, pale face of the little girl with the cast in the rearview mirror until the car was just a shimmer of heat on the horizon. He didn't pull out his phone. He didn't call the police. He knew how this went. A child's word against a teacher's. A whisper against a system designed to protect its own. He stayed there for a long time, the engine idling beneath him, the sound a low growl that mirrored the feeling coiling in his gut. The sun beat down, but he felt cold. He lifted his hand, the one that had been closest to the girl, and looked at his calloused fingers. It felt as if her whisper had been branded onto his skin. That night, the clubhouse was quiet. The air hung thick with the smell of stale beer and motor oil. Bear stood before a long table where his men sat, their faces shadowed under the low-hanging lights. They were rough men, etched with the maps of hard lives, but they were his brothers. He told them what the little girl had said. He didn't embellish. He just repeated the 7 words, letting them fall into the silence. "Teacher hurts my sister if I tell." No one spoke. The silence that followed was different from the one before. It was heavier, charged with a collective, simmering fury. A man named Priest, who had a silver cross tattooed on his neck, slowly placed his bottle on the table. The sound was a sharp crack in the stillness. "What's the school?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "Oak Valley Elementary," Bear said. "Just off the highway." Another man, Jax, a wiry mechanic whose hands were permanently stained with grease, leaned forward. "What's the plan, Bear?" Bear looked at each of them. He saw the same cold fire in their eyes that he felt in his own chest. These men knew what it was to be powerless. They knew what it was to be unheard. "The plan," Bear said, his voice hard as iron, "is we watch, we listen, we become ghosts. We don't go in loud, we go in smart. This woman, this teacher, she's used to hiding. We're going to find out what she's hiding in." He paused, letting the weight of the task settle. "And when we know, we'll make sure everyone else does too." For the next 2 weeks, the 177 Angels became shadows. They took shifts. Jax would park his beat-up work van across from the school, pretending to be on a lunch break. his eyes hidden behind reflective sunglasses. Priest in civilian clothes would walk his dog in the park adjacent to the playground during recess. Two others would follow the school bus route, noting the stop where the two sisters got on and off. Bear took the morning shift. He'd sit in his truck a block away, a pair of military-grade binoculars resting on the dashboard. He learned their routine. The grandmother, Elena, would walk them to the bus stop every morning at 7:45. Lily was a tiny guardian, her hand always holding Mia's. Mia was silent, always silent. She walked with her head down, a little ghost in a pink backpack, her cast a constant, glaring reminder. He learned the teacher's name, Ms. Albright. She was a picture of respectability. She drove a sensible sedan, wore cardigans, and had a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She was the one who met Mia at the classroom door each day. Bear watched through his binoculars as she would take the little girl's hand. He saw it, a micro-expression, a flicker of something possessive and cold in her eyes, before the smile snapped back into place. The gut feeling, the splinter of ice twisted deeper. Have you ever had a feeling like that? A certainty in your bones that something is terribly wrong, even when the world is telling you everything is fine? It's a primal instinct, a warning bell from a part of you that sees what your conscious mind refuses to accept. If you have, share your story in the comments. And if you believe in listening to that instinct, hit that subscribe button, because the world needs more people who are willing to see. The angels gathered their observations. Little things, puzzle pieces that didn't fit. Mia never played with the other kids at recess. She would stand by the wall, her good hand pressed flat against the bricks, watching. Lily never strayed far from her. Miss Albright would often keep Mia inside during playtime, citing the need to help her catch up or protect her arm. One afternoon, Priest saw it. He was sitting on a park bench, pretending to read. Miss Albright had Mia by the hand, walking her toward the nurse's office. Mia stumbled. For a split second, the teacher's grip on the girl's good arm tightened viciously. Her knuckles went white. Mia's face crumpled in a silent cry of pain, her mouth open but no sound coming out. Then just as quickly, Miss Albright's face softened into a mask of concern as a playground monitor glanced their way. She knelt, fussing over the girl, her voice a sugary murmur that didn't carry across the yard. But Priest had seen it, the flash of cruel anger, the silent, terrified response from the child. He called Bear immediately. "It's real," he said, his voice tight. "I saw her. She hurt the kid." That was all they needed. The observation phase was over. That evening, the clubhouse was buzzing with a low, controlled energy. They had the what. Now they needed the how. A direct confrontation would be dismissed. They were bikers, outlaws in the public eye. Their word against a beloved teacher would be worthless. They needed something undeniable. "We need to see inside that classroom," Jack said, tracing patterns on the table with a greasy finger. "We need to know what happens when that door closes." "Can't put a camera in a school," another member, a tech-savvy kid they called Glitch, pointed out. "Illegal. We'd be the ones going to jail." Bear was silent, thinking. His mind worked like an engine, breaking down a complex problem into its component parts. The weakness wasn't the school. It was the teacher, Miss Albright. She had a routine. She had habits. And every habit was a potential vulnerability. "We don't go for the school," Bear said finally. "We go for her." "Glitch, what can you find out? Home address, car, anything." For 2 days, Glitch worked his magic. He found her, a quiet suburban house, a meticulously kept garden. He also found something else. Ms. Albright was a creature of absolute habit. She left her house at 7:15 a.m. every day. She stopped at the same coffee shop. She parked in the same spot at the school, and she always left a spare car key in a magnetic box under the front passenger side wheel well. An old habit, a holdover from a time when people felt safer. It was a small crack in her perfect facade, but it was enough. The plan was simple and terrifyingly risky. The night before, under the cover of darkness, Glitch would retrieve the key, clone it using a portable device, and return it. The next morning, while Ms. Albright was inside the coffee shop, Jax would use the clone key to get into her car. He would have less than 5 minutes. His target was a small, innocuous-looking object, a digital photo frame that sat on her dashboard, cycling through pictures of smiling nieces and nephews, a gift they'd learned from her sister. Glitch had sourced an identical model. Their version, however, had been modified. It contained a high-resolution camera and a microphone, powered by a tiny battery pack that would last for 10 hours. It would record everything. The next morning, the air was thick with tension. Bear and Priest sat in a truck down the street, watching the coffee shop. Jax was parked closer, slouched down in his van, waiting. At 7:20, just as predicted, Ms. Albright's sedan pulled into the lot. She went inside. "Go!" Bear said into his radio. Jax moved like a shadow. He was out of the van, across the asphalt, and kneeling by the car in seconds. His hands were a blur. The door clicked open. He slid inside. Bear started a silent count. 10 seconds. 20. He could see Ms. Albright at the counter, chatting with the barista, her back to the window. 30 seconds. Every second stretched, thin and tight, like a wire about to snap. 45 seconds. Jack slid back out, the old photo frame in his hand. He closed the car door, the sound barely audible, and was back in his van before the teacher had even picked up her latte. "Done," Jax's voice crackled over the radio, laced with adrenaline. "We're good." Bear let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Phase 1 was complete. Now came the hardest part. Waiting. They had to wait for the school day to end, retrieve the frame, and see what horrors it had captured. That afternoon, they repeated the process in reverse. When Ms. Albright left the school and stopped at the grocery store on her way home, Jax swapped the frames back. The original was returned to the dashboard, the evidence now safely in their hands. Back at the clubhouse, they gathered around Glitch's laptop. The silence was absolute as he plugged in the device and downloaded the file. He clicked play. The first few hours were mundane. The sounds of a normal classroom, children laughing, reciting lessons. Ms. Albright's voice was patient, kind. Bear felt a knot of doubt tighten in his stomach. Had they been wrong? Then the bell rang for recess. The other children filed out. The video showed Miss Albright leading Mia back to her desk at the back of the room, away from the door's window. "Did you tell anyone, Mia?" Miss Albright's voice was different now. The warmth was gone, replaced by something cold and sharp. "Did you use your words like a bad little girl?" Mia shook her head, her small body trembling. "Let's see that arm," the teacher said. She unwrapped the Velcro straps on the cast splint. The camera was at the wrong angle to see clearly, but her movements were rough, impatient. Mia let out a tiny choked whimper. "Oh, does that hurt?" Ms. Albright cooed, her voice a poisonous syrup. "This is what happens when we don't listen, when we think about telling secrets." The audio was clear. There was a sickening, wet crunch. Not a break, but the sound of something being bent the wrong way. Mia's silent scream was a gaping hole in the audio, a vacuum of pure terror. The video shook as the little girl convulsed in her chair. "There," Miss Albright said, her voice calm as she restrapped the splint. "Now it really hurts. And if you ever think about telling your sister or your grandmother anything again, I'll do the other one. Do you understand me?" Mia could only nod, tears streaming down her face. Glitch slammed the laptop shut. The room was filled with a murderous silence. The men around the table were carved from stone, their faces grim masks of fury. Bear felt the rage rise in him, a white-hot tide. It wasn't the wild, chaotic anger of a bar fight. It was cold, precise, and utterly focused. He stood up. "We ride," he said. The words were quiet, but they echoed like a death sentence. "Tomorrow morning." Priest looked at him. "Not the police?" "The police get the recording. After," Bear said. "First she sees us. She needs to understand. The whole town needs to understand. These little girls are not alone. Not anymore." He looked around the room at the faces of his brothers. They were ready. He raised his hand, a silent toast. "To the quiet ones," he said. And every man in the room knew he was talking about Mia. The next morning, the sun rose on a day that would change Oak Valley forever. 177 motorcycles gathered on the edge of town. The sound started as a low rumble, a distant promise of thunder. Then as one, they roared to life. The ground vibrated. Windows rattled in their frames. It was the sound of judgment coming. They rode in perfect formation, a river of chrome and black leather flowing through the quiet suburban streets. They didn't speed. They didn't swerve. They moved with the slow, inexorable power of a glacier. People came out of their houses, staring in awe and fear at the procession. They turned onto the street of Oak Valley Elementary. The rumble grew into a deafening roar. They filled the road, surrounding the school like a disciplined army. Bear led them, pulling his bike to a stop directly in front of the main entrance. One by one, 176 other engines cut out, until there was only the sound of Bear's bike, idling with a low, threatening growl. He killed the engine. The silence that descended was more profound than the noise had been. It was absolute, heavy, and watchful. Doors opened. Teachers and staff peered out, their faces a mixture of confusion and alarm. The principal, a flustered man named Mr. Harris, came rushing out, his tie askew. "What is the meaning of this? You can't be here. This is a school," he sputtered. Bear swung his leg over his bike. He didn't run. He walked. His boots crunched on the pavement with deliberate, rhythmic steps. The other 176 angels dismounted, forming a silent, unmoving wall behind him. They didn't speak. They just stood there, their presence an overwhelming force. "We're here for Mia and Lily," Bear said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of every engine behind him. "And we're here for Ms. Albright." At the mention of her name, a flicker of understanding and terror crossed the principal's face. He started to stammer a defense, but Bear held up a hand. "We have a recording," Bear said simply. "Everything. The threats. The sound of you hurting that little girl. The police have been sent a copy. They're on their way. But we wanted to be here first. We wanted you and her to see the people you've been dealing with." From a classroom window, Bear saw her face. Ms. Albright, pale as a ghost, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her. Her eyes met his, and in them, he saw not remorse, but the fury of being caught. "Get the girls," Bear said to the principal, his voice dropping to a command. "Now!" Mr. Harris, shaking, scurried back inside. A few moments later, he emerged with Lily and Mia. Lily's eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and dawning hope. Mia was just terrified, hiding behind her sister. When Lily saw Bear, she stopped. She recognized him, the big, quiet man from the diner. Bear knelt down, moving slowly, making himself smaller. He was acutely aware of the 176 stone-faced killers standing behind him, trying to look as non-threatening as a tidal wave. "Hey," he said, his voice softer than he thought possible. "We heard you. I heard you. It's over now. You're safe." Lily's composure finally broke. A sob tore from her chest, and she launched herself at him, wrapping her arms around his neck, burying her face in the rough leather of his vest. Behind her, little Mia watched, her huge eyes fixed on Bear. She took a hesitant step, then another, until she was standing right beside him. She reached out her good hand and gently, tentatively, touched the skull and wings patch on his arm. It was a question, an act of trust. Bear looked from her small hand to her searching eyes. "Yeah, kid," he whispered. "We're the angels." The wail of sirens grew closer. The police arrived to a surreal scene, a small elementary school surrounded by a silent army of bikers, and a large man in a leather vest holding two small, trembling girls as if they were the most precious things in the world. Ms. Albright was led out in handcuffs, her face a crumpled mask of disbelief. She didn't look at the children. She couldn't. The eyes of 177 men followed her every step, their silent condemnation of force she couldn't escape. The epilogue to that day wasn't written in headlines. It was written in the quiet moments that followed. The girl's grandmother, Elena, arrived, her face etched with a grief and guilt so profound it was heartbreaking. She had suspected, she later confessed to Bear, but she had been too scared, too intimidated by the school system to act on her fears. The bikers didn't judge her. They simply stood with her. The 177 angels didn't just ride away. They stayed. They set up a trust fund for the girl's education. They found Elena a better lawyer than she could ever afford. When it became clear that Elena was too frail to care for them long-term and the foster system loomed, Bear did something he never imagined. He, a single man who lived for the open road, stepped into a courthouse and filed for guardianship. The club became a sprawling, unconventional, and fiercely protective family. Years passed. The story of the 177 angels became a local legend. They were no longer seen as a threat, but as guardians. Their clubhouse started a new chapter, the Quiet Ones Foundation, dedicated to providing legal aid and support for abused children who had no voice. Mia's arm healed, but the deeper wounds took longer. For the first year, she still didn't speak, but she was surrounded by the low rumble of motorcycles, the smell of leather, and the gentle patience of men who knew how to wait. One afternoon, she was sitting on the steps of the clubhouse, watching Jax tune an engine. He dropped a wrench, cursing under his breath. "It's the other one," a tiny voice said. Jax froze. He turned slowly. Mia was pointing a small finger at his toolbox. "The shiny one," she clarified. Tears welled in the grizzled mechanic's eyes. He picked up the correct wrench and looked at her. "Thanks, kid," he said, his voice thick. From that day on, Mia's voice, once silenced by fear, began to fill the spaces between them. Lily thrived. She became the club's fiercest advocate, a straight-A student with a will of iron and the unwavering confidence of someone who knows she is loved and protected. She learned to ride a small dirt bike before she learned to drive a car. On the day of Lily's high school graduation, the entire club showed up. 177 motorcycles filled the school parking lot, a testament to a promise made so many years ago. Bear stood in the crowd, his face weathered by time and sun, watching as she accepted her diploma. Later that night, back at the clubhouse, the family gathered. Lily and Mia, now confident young women, stood in the center of it all. Bear raised his glass, the same way he had on that dark night when they made their decision. "To the quiet ones," he said, his voice full of emotion. He looked at Mia, whose smile was the brightest light in the room. "And to the ones who listen," Lily added, raising her own glass and looking directly at Bear. Her eyes shone with a gratitude that was deeper than words. The story of that day reminds us that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear leather. Sometimes they're the ones you'd cross the street to avoid. Courage isn't about the absence of fear. It's about acting in spite of it. It's about listening to the smallest voice, trusting that gut feeling, and having the strength to stand for those who can't stand for themselves. If this story touched you, please give it a like and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that there is still good in this world. And subscribe for more stories that prove that the most powerful force on earth is a handful of good people who refuse to look away.